My husband called my designs little hobbies. He never realized I was busy architecting his downfall, brick by painstaking brick. The silence in our house was my favorite sound. For 10 years, that silence had been a rare and precious commodity, something to be savored like a vintage wine. Tonight, it was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, charged silence of a sky about to break, the air thick with ozone and unspoken promises. I sat in the leather armchair, his armchair, technically swirling the last of a crisp Sauvignon Blanc in my glass. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the manicured lawn of our perfect suburban home transition from emerald green to a deep, shadowed blue as the sun bled out of the sky. Everything looked exactly as it should, perfect, maintained, a lie. My husband Mark was due home any minute from his business trip to Chicago, a 3-day conference that, according to the credit card statement I'd already seen, involved far more charges from a hotel's room service and a high-end lingerie boutique than it did from any convention center. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last, except it would be. That was the other promise humming in the air tonight. For years, Mark had cultivated an image of me, both for himself and for the world. I was the quiet, agreeable wife, the one who had given up a promising career in architecture to manage his home, his social calendar, and his ego. I was the one who was lucky to have him. He was the high-flying executive, the deal maker, the one who brought in the real money. My small freelance design projects were just my little hobbies, something to keep me busy. He'd pat my head when I showed him a finished project, a gesture one might use on a clever golden retriever. "That's nice, honey," he'd say, his eyes already drifting back to his phone, to the world where important things happened. The mistake he made was underestimating the quiet ones. While he was out conquering the world, or at least his regional sales division, I was observing. I was learning. I managed our finances, a task he'd gladly offloaded onto me because it was tedious. I saw every transaction, every bonus, every investment, and for the last 18 months, I had been planning. It started as a fantasy, a little seed of rebellion I'd water in the dead of night. What if I just left? But where would I go? How would I live? He had woven a narrative of my dependency so thoroughly that even I had started to believe it. The turning point came 6 months ago. We were at a dinner party with his boss. Mark was holding court, telling some exaggerated story about a deal he'd closed. His boss's wife, a lovely woman named Eleanor, turned to me. "Clara," she said, "I saw the feature on the Peterson house in Modern Homes magazine. Your design was breathtaking. I had no idea you were so talented." Before I could even thank her, Mark laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. He draped a heavy arm over my shoulder. "Oh, this one? Yeah, she likes to dabble. Keeps her out of trouble," he said, squeezing me just a little too tight. "But let's be honest, the real architecture is in the deals I build, right?" The table chuckled politely. In that moment, watching the condescending smile on his face, the seed of rebellion bloomed into a carnivorous flower. It was time to dabble in a little architecture of my own. I was going to dismantle our life, brick by brick. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway snapped me out of my reverie. The headlights of his silver Mercedes swept across the living room, and a moment later, the engine cut out. The heavy front door opened and closed with a definitive thud. "Clara!" he called out, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. He sounded irritated, as he always did after a trip. The performance of the doting husband was over, and he was back in his kingdom, ready to be served. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie and tossing his briefcase onto the floor with a thump that made me wince internally for the polished hardwood. He didn't even look at me, his eyes scanning the room for flaws. "Why isn't dinner ready? I texted you I was leaving the airport an hour ago." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. "Hello to you too, Mark. How was Chicago?" "Fine," he snapped, finally turning his gaze on me. He frowned, his eyes narrowing. He could sense it, the change in the atmosphere. the lack of frantic, apologetic energy from my end. I wasn't rushing to get him a drink or asking if his flight was okay. I was just sitting, watching him. "What's with you?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Just thinking," I said calmly. "Well, can you think in the kitchen? I'm starving." He started to walk toward the hall, but then he stopped. He turned back slowly, his gaze sweeping past me to the large window overlooking the front yard. In the gathering dusk, the streetlights had just flickered on, casting a pool of orange light on the lawn and on the sign. The bright red, professionally printed sign that had been hammered into the soft turf just that afternoon. He squinted, taking a step closer to the window. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. He pressed his face closer to the glass, his breath fogging a small patch. I could see the exact moment the words came into focus. I saw his shoulders tense, his whole body go rigid. The big, bold letters at the top were unmistakable, even in the dim light, and underneath, a single devastating word: sold. He spun around to face me, his face a mask of utter confusion and disbelief. "Is this a joke? What is that sign doing on our lawn?" I placed my wine glass on the coaster beside me, the click of glass on wood echoing in the silent room. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my dress. I met his bewildered gaze without flinching. This was it. The first domino. "It's not a joke, Mark." His face began to flush with anger, the confusion curdling into rage. "You put the house up for sale? Our house? Without telling me? Are you insane?" He started pacing, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "We are not selling. I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, Clara, but it's over. You'll call the realtor first thing in the morning and take that ridiculous sign down." He stopped and pointed a finger at me, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. The voice he used when he was about to deliver his final, crushing blow. "I am sick of this. I am sick of your moods and your little projects. You know what? I've had it. I want a divorce." He stood there, chest puffed out, expecting me to shatter. He expected tears, pleading, begging. He expected to see the terror in my eyes as the comfortable world he provided was threatened to be ripped away. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting his ultimatum settle in the air like dust. Then I allowed a small, genuine smile to touch my lips for the first time all night. I raised my hand and pointed gracefully past his shoulder, toward the window and the sign that sealed his fate. "Way ahead of you," I said. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The rage in his eyes was blinding. "You can't do that," he roared, his voice cracking. "You can't sell this house without my signature. My name is on the deed. This is illegal." I walked over to the mahogany desk in the corner and picked up a slim folio. I held it out to him. "Is it? You really should read the fine print, Mark, especially on the documents you sign. Remember last April when you refinanced the mortgage to free up some capital for that can't-miss tech investment? You were in such a hurry to get to the golf course, you just signed everything I put in front of you." I tapped the folio, including the quitclaim deed that put the house solely in my name. He stared at the folio in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. For a second, he just stood there, paralyzed, the gears of his brilliant executive mind grinding to a halt. Then, with a strangled roar, he lunged, snatching the papers from my grasp. His hands, usually so steady when signing million-dollar contracts, trembled as he ripped the folio open. Documents scattered onto the floor, a flurry of white against the dark wood. He dropped to his knees, frantically shuffling through them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He found it. The quitclaim deed. I saw his eyes darting across the page, a page he had clearly never read before. I saw them land on the notary's seal, then on the two signatures at the bottom. Mine, neat and precise, and his, a confident, arrogant scrawl that had just signed away his kingdom. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, grayish pallor. He looked up at me from the floor, and for the first time in our 10 years of marriage, I saw genuine shock in his eyes. The mask of the all-powerful Mark was gone, replaced by the face of a boy who had just been cheated out of his favorite toy. You tricked me," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Tricked you," I replied, my voice as cold and clear as the ice I wished was in my drink. "No, Mark. I just paid attention. I read the documents. You were the one who always said the devil is in the details. You were just too busy playing God to bother with them." He scrambled to his feet, the papers clutched in his fist. The shock was already hardening back into fury. "This is what this is about? That stupid comment at the dinner party? You're throwing away our marriage over a joke?" "A joke?" I laughed, and the sound was foreign and sharp in the perfect quiet of the room. "No, Mark, it wasn't about the joke. It was about the truth behind it. It was about every condescending pat on the head. It was about every business trip that smelled of another woman's perfume. It was about you buying Chantel lingerie in a size that wasn't mine 3 days ago in Chicago. Shall I go on? Because I have a very detailed list." His jaw snapped shut. The mention of the lingerie, so specific and so recent, hit him like a physical blow. He knew in that instant that I wasn't just guessing. I had proof. The balance of power had shifted so seismically that the very air in the room felt different. He was no longer on solid ground, but Mark was a fighter, a cornered animal. He abandoned the moral argument because he knew he had lost it. He went straight for the jugular, the only thing he believed truly mattered. "Fine," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You want to play this way? You want a divorce? You've got it, but you get nothing. You think you're clever? Selling the house? That money is marital property. My lawyers will tie you up in court until you can't afford a bus ticket, let alone a new home. I'll freeze every account, every credit card. You have nothing without me, Clara. You built nothing. I made every cent that paid for this life, and I will burn it all to the ground before I let you have a single penny of it." He was panting by the end of his tirade, his face red, his eyes bulging slightly. He looked triumphant, certain that this was the threat that would finally break me. The fear of being left with nothing was supposed to be my ultimate weakness, the leash he'd held for a decade. He expected me to crumble. I let him have his moment. I let the silence stretch, letting his threats hang in the air between us like poisonous spores. I calmly walked back to the desk, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I didn't look at the scattered documents of my old life. Instead, I picked up a single different folder. It was plain manila, with no label. "You're right," I said, turning back to face him. "You did earn all that money, and you were so proud of your latest move. So savvy." I opened the folder. "That can't-miss tech investment you refinanced the house for. Viridian Dynamics. You said it was the future. You sunk almost every liquid asset we had into it. You were so sure." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, his anger momentarily overshadowed by his pride. "It is the future. That stock is going to triple. What's your point?" I pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was a certificate of incorporation. "My point, Mark," I said, holding it up so he could see the letterhead, "is that you are a brilliant deal maker. You saw an incredible opportunity. You just made one tiny mistake." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, taking a hesitant step forward. I smiled, a slow, predatory smile that I didn't even know I was capable of. "You forgot to do your due diligence on the majority shareholder, the person who founded the company, the person to whom you wired over $3 million of our money 2 months ago." I let my eyes meet his, pouring all the years of quiet observation and silent fury into that one look. "Viridian Dynamics isn't the future, darling. It's a shell corporation, and I own it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing, of a man's entire reality being ripped out from under him. Mark's face went through a rapid-fire series of emotions: confusion, denial, a desperate search for the lie in my eyes. But he found none. He only found the cold, hard truth glinting back at him. The stock he'd bragged about to all his friends, the investment that was supposed to cement his reputation as a financial genius, was a phantom, a trap, and I had been the one holding the snare. No, he breathed, shaking his head slowly, a child refusing to accept bedtime. No, that's impossible. I vetted them. I spoke to the CEO, David Chen. David Chen is a very talented actor I hired for a month, I said, my voice cutting through his denial like a surgeon's scalpel. He costs $5,000 a week, but the performance was worth every penny, don't you think? You were so eager to get in on the ground floor of the next big thing, so desperate for another conquest to boast about at the club, that you didn't look too closely. You saw what you wanted to see. I tossed the certificate of incorporation onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, final slap. The money isn't in some tech startup, Mark. It's sitting in a business account in the Cayman Islands, an account that requires a single signature. Mine. He staggered back as if I'd physically struck him. He collapsed into the sofa opposite me, his bravado and rage completely deflated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He stared at the floor, at the scattered papers of our life, as if they were the pieces of a puzzle he could no longer comprehend. "My money," he mumbled, his voice thick with disbelief. "You stole my money." "Our money," I corrected him gently. "It was all marital property, remember? You said so yourself. And I haven't stolen it. I've merely restructured our assets. I architected a more equitable distribution. It's my little hobby, you see, dabbling." I savored the bitter taste of his own words on my tongue. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just sat there, his head in his hands. The weight of his utter and complete defeat seemed to crush him. He had no leverage, no threats left. He had built his entire identity on his financial power, on his ability to control, to provide, to take away. And in the space of 10 minutes, I had stripped him of all of it. He was a king with no kingdom, a god with no worshippers. When he finally looked up, the anger was gone. In its place was something I had never seen before, pleading. "Clara, why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "After all these years, everything we built, why would you do this?" I felt a pang, not of pity, but of something akin to nostalgia for the woman I used to be. The woman who would have been swayed by that question, who would have felt a surge of guilt. But that woman was gone. She had died a slow death, starved by years of neglect and casual cruelty. "You ask why now," I said, my voice low. "You never asked why when I stopped smiling in photos. You never asked why when I started spending more and more time alone in my studio. You never asked why when the light went out of my eyes. You didn't notice, Mark, because you weren't looking. You were too busy looking at your own reflection in my adoration." I let that sink in before continuing. This isn't about one affair or one condescending comment. This is about a decade of being treated like a decorative object, an accessory to your life. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a beautifully maintained home and a quiet, admiring audience. Well, the audience has left the theater, and the theater has been sold. A new thought seemed to strike him, a fresh wave of panic. The buyers. "When is the closing?" "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp," I replied. "Everything is packed." He shot to his feet, his eyes wild. "Packed? What's packed?" He stormed out of the living room and down the hall toward our master bedroom. I heard him throw the door open. I didn't follow. I just listened. I heard the sound of drawers being pulled out, the frantic opening and closing of closet doors. A moment later, he stormed back, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "My clothes are gone," he yelled. "My watch collection, my cufflinks, the safe is empty. What did you do with my things?" "They aren't your things anymore, Mark," I said calmly. I gestured to a small stack of cardboard boxes neatly taped up by the front door. I packed you a bag, a few suits, some casual wear, enough for a week or two. Everything else? The watches, the art, the first edition books you never read was sold. Sold? You can't sell my personal property. I can, I said, holding up a single piece of paper I'd retrieved from my manila folder. When I created Viridian Dynamics, I also had it acquire another company, a small collections agency, which in turn bought up all of your personal debt. The loan for the Mercedes, your line of credit at the club, the half a dozen platinum credit cards you use to fund your extracurricular activities. According to these legally binding documents, you defaulted on all of it. So, as the new owner of your debt, I legally repossessed your assets as collateral. It was all very professional. They made a detailed inventory. He looked at the boxes, then at me, and I saw the last glimmer of hope die in his eyes. He was truly, utterly ruined. Stripped of his home, his money, his possessions, he had nothing. He was nothing. The great Mark, the master of the universe, was left with nothing but a few boxes of clothes and a car he no longer owned. He sank to his knees, a guttural sound of pure despair escaping his lips. "You've left me with nothing," he whispered, tears now openly streaming down his face. I looked down at the broken man on the floor of the house he thought was his. A part of me should have felt triumphant, but I just felt empty. The war was over. I had won. But the victory felt hollow. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air wash over the room. The new owners were a lovely young family with 2 children. I imagined their laughter echoing in these halls, filling the silence I had both cherished and loathed. It was time to go. "It's not true that I left you with nothing," I said, my voice softer now. I turned back to look at him one last time. "I left you exactly what you gave me for the last 10 years. He looked up at me, his face a tear-streaked ruin, confusion warring with his despair. "What? What are you talking about?" he choked out. "You've taken everything." "No," I replied, my hand resting on the cool brass of the doorknob. "I left you with the consequences of your own choices, a life built on a foundation of lies and neglect. An empty echo. That's all I had. And now, it's all you have." I didn't wait for his response. I stepped out into the night, pulling the heavy door closed behind me. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging shut, not on me, but on him. I didn't look back. I walked down the stone pathway past the sold sign that was my Declaration of Independence and got into the modest sedan I'd bought with cash a week earlier. It wasn't a Mercedes, but it was mine. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, leaving the perfect house, the perfect lawn, and the ruins of the man I'd married in my rearview mirror. The first few weeks were a blur of logistics. Closing on the house, finalizing the dissolution of Viridian Dynamics, moving the assets into new, more conventional accounts under my own name. I settled in a small, elegant apartment in the city, a place with high ceilings, huge windows, and a view of the skyline I used to dream of shaping. I started my own design firm, Clara Vance Designs. No more hobbies, no more dabbling. This was my name, my work, my life. My lawyer, a shrewd, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, handled the divorce proceedings with ruthless efficiency. Mark, as predicted, had tried to fight. He'd hired a shark from the city's most aggressive law firm. There was a flurry of angry letters, of motions filed and threats made. But they had nothing to stand on. Every I had been dotted, every T crossed. My financial architecture was flawless. The quitclaim deed was ironclad. The repossession of his assets was perfectly legal. His lawyers quickly realized they were firing blanks. The day the divorce was finalized, Ms. Albright called me. "It's done," she said, her voice crisp. He didn't even show up. His lawyer signed for him. He accepted the standard settlement. "Which was?" I asked, though I already knew. He gets to keep his personal debts, she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. Congratulations, Ms. Vance. You are a free woman. And I was. Free. The word felt enormous, almost too big to fit inside my small apartment. I should have been celebrating, drinking champagne, dancing. Instead, I felt a strange and unsettling quiet. I had spent so long, nearly 2 years, meticulously planning my escape. Every waking moment had been consumed by the intricate details of my revenge. It was a full-time job, a secret project that gave my empty life purpose and direction. Now, it was over. The silence I had craved felt less like peace and more like a vacuum. I threw myself into my work. I took on projects, big and small. I designed a sleek, minimalist downtown loft for a tech CEO and a warm, sprawling country home for a family with 4 kids. My reputation grew. The feature in Modern Homes was just the beginning. Soon I was in Architectural Digest, then Ellie Decor. Clara Vance Designs became synonymous with clean lines, innovative use of space, and an almost psychic understanding of what made a house a home. I was successful. I was respected. I was, by all accounts, thriving. But at night, the quiet would return. I'd sit in my beautiful apartment looking out at the glittering city lights and feel a profound sense of anticlimax. I had won. I had utterly and completely dismantled the man who had tried to diminish me. So why did I feel so empty? About a year after the divorce, I was at a gallery opening, networking. A man I recognized from a rival firm approached me. "Clara Vance," he said, shaking my hand. "Big fan of your work. Heard a crazy story about your ex-husband, Mark." I stiffened, preparing my polite, dismissive response. I hated talking about him. "Oh?" "Yeah," the man continued, oblivious. "Heard he completely lost his mind after the divorce. Total meltdown. My cousin works at the country club he used to belong to. Said he showed up one day, ranting and raving, looking like he'd been sleeping in his car. They had to call security to escort him out. Can you believe it? The guy used to run this town." I mumbled something non-committal and excused myself, a knot tightening in my stomach. I had imagined him struggling, yes. I had imagined him humbled. But a complete meltdown? Sleeping in his car? That wasn't part of the architecture of my revenge. That was a ruin I hadn't planned on. The story stuck with me, a burr under my skin. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it wasn't my problem. He had made his bed. But the image of him, broken and ranting, haunted my quiet moments. The emptiness I felt began to take on a new shape, a shape that looked suspiciously like guilt. Was this what I wanted? To not just defeat him, but to utterly destroy him? The question gnawed at me for weeks. I found my focus slipping at work. The clean lines of my designs felt muddled. One night, unable to sleep, I did something I promised myself I would never do. I opened my laptop and typed his name into the search bar. There wasn't much. A few old articles about his business achievements, his dormant LinkedIn profile. But then I saw it. A link to a local news story from a small town about 3 hours north of the city. The headline read, "Local transient arrested for public intoxication." There was a mugshot. His face was puffy and unshaven, his eyes vacant and lost. He looked 10 years older. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just fallen. He had plummeted. Against my better judgment, I clicked on a few more links. I found my way to a public records database. He had a list of minor offenses: vagrancy, loitering. It was a portrait of a man who had completely given up, and then I saw the most recent entry, an address. It wasn't a house or an apartment. It was the address of a homeless shelter, the St. Jude's Mission on the gritty side of that forgotten little town. I stared at the address on the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the end of his story. This was the result of my perfect plan. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt justice had been served. But all I felt was a sickening, hollow ache. I had set out to reclaim my life, but in the process, had I obliterated his soul? I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. I told myself to forget it, to let it go. It was his life, his choices. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the image of his mugshot, of the empty eyes that used to look at me with such casual disdain. The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt since the day I put the sold sign on the lawn. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know why I was doing it. But I knew I had to see him. I got in my car and I drove. 3 hours later, I was parked across the street from St. Jude's Mission. It was a grim, gray building with barred windows. People milled about outside, their faces etched with hardship. I sat in my car for almost an hour, my courage failing me. What was I doing here? Reliving the past? Gloating? Offering pity? Finally, I saw him. He came out of the front door, squinting in the afternoon sun. He was thin, gaunt even, and dressed in worn, ill-fitting clothes. He was carrying a tattered paperback book. He looked lost, adrift, a ghost of the man he once was. He walked down the street and sat on a park bench, opening his book. He seemed to be trying to disappear into its pages. My heart ached with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't love. It wasn't pity. It was a connection. A terrible, unbreakable connection to the person whose life I had systematically dismantled. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and started walking towards him. He didn't look up as I approached. He was completely absorbed in his book. I stopped a few feet away from the bench. "Mark?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. He froze. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a haunted, desolate emptiness. But then, as he recognized me, something shifted. The emptiness was replaced by a flicker of something else, something dark and terrifying. It wasn't shock. It wasn't anger. It was recognition, but a twisted, chilling kind of recognition. A slow, terrible smile spread across his chapped lips. "Clara," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "I knew you'd come. I've been waiting for you." He patted the empty space on the bench beside him. "She told me you'd find me eventually." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "She?" I asked, my voice tight. "She who?" The cold dread that had been a dull ache in my chest for months sharpened into a blade of ice. This wasn't the reaction of a broken man. This was something else entirely. The vacant look was gone, replaced by a frighteningly lucid gleam. Mark's terrible smile widened. "Eleanor, of course," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Eleanor Thorne, my boss's wife. You remember her, don't you? The one who admired your breathtaking design." He said the word breathtaking with a sneer that was so familiar it made my skin crawl. My mind reeled, struggling to connect the pieces. Eleanor? The kind older woman who had given me that one moment of validation at the dinner party? What could she possibly have to do with this? I don't understand," I stammered. "Oh, you will," Mark said. He leaned back on the bench, a picture of unnerving calm. "You see, Clara, you were right about so much. I was arrogant. I was condescending. I was a terrible husband. But you made one tiny mistake in your otherwise perfect architecture. You assumed you were the only one planning something." He let that hang in the air for a moment, enjoying my confusion. "Eleanor and we've been together for years, long before you started your little rebellion. She wasn't just my boss's wife. She was my partner in every sense of the word." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture far more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. The business trips, the confidence, the way he and his boss, Robert Thorne, were always so in sync. "Robert has had Alzheimer's for the last 5 years, Mark continued, his voice conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Early onset. It's tragic, really. Eleanor has been running the company from behind the scenes, making all the real decisions. But the board is old-fashioned. They wouldn't have handed the reins over to a woman, especially not while her husband was still technically alive. They needed a successor, a man they trusted, someone Robert had seemingly been grooming for years. My blood ran cold. "You?" I whispered. "Me," he confirmed with a nod. "Eleanor was the architect. I was just the project manager. We needed to secure my position, and to do that, we needed capital, a lot of it. We also needed me to be unencumbered, free from a messy, expensive divorce." The whole elaborate scheme crashed down on me. Viridian Dynamics. It wasn't my idea. It was theirs. "You wanted me to leave you," I realized, the words tasting like ash. "You pushed me. All those little cruelties, the dabbling comment. You were pushing me to a breaking point." "We underestimated you," he admitted, a flicker of what looked like genuine respect in his eyes. "We thought you'd just file for a normal divorce. We'd fight it, drag it out, hide the assets. Standard procedure. We never in a million years thought you'd come up with something so elegant, so total. Selling the house, creating a shell corporation. Honestly, Clara, it was brilliant. Eleanor was very impressed. I felt sick. My grand plan, my meticulously crafted revenge, the very thing that had defined me for 2 years. I hadn't been the architect at all. I had been a pawn, moved across the board in someone else's game. They had wanted me to take the money. They had needed me to. When you disappeared with all our marital assets, Mark explained, it was the perfect solution. I was the victim. The poor, heartbroken husband whose vindictive wife took him for everything he had. I lost my house, my savings, everything. The board was so sympathetic. Eleanor convinced them to give me a massive advance on my future salary to get back on my feet. And with no assets to my name, your divorce settlement was, well, nothing. You played your part perfectly. He had let me win. He had let me destroy him because his own destruction was the final piece of their puzzle. The public humiliation, the country club incident, even this performance as a homeless wreck. It was all part of the act. "Robert passed away 2 months ago," Mark said, his voice dropping slightly. "It was very peaceful. The board held an emergency meeting. With Eleanor's tearful endorsement, they unanimously voted me in as the new CEO. The transition was seamless." I stared at him, at the worn clothes and the chapped lips, and I finally understood. This wasn't a ruin. This was a disguise. A temporary costume he was wearing before ascending to his throne, the throne that I had helped build for him. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Why tell me all this? Why are you here?" "Because Eleanor insisted," he said. He reached into the pocket of his shabby jacket and pulled out a long, crisp envelope. He held it out to me. "She felt you deserved to know the truth, and she felt you deserved this. Your share." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. My eyes widened as I saw the amount. It was for $10 million. "Consider it a finder's fee," Mark said. "For finding a way to liquidate our assets so cleanly. We couldn't have done it better ourselves. The money you took, it was a seed investment, and it has paid off handsomely. The company is more profitable than ever." He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers. A black town car, the kind I used to ride in, pulled up to the curb. The back door opened. "You won, Clara," he said, and for the first time his smile seemed genuine. "In your own way, you really did. You got your freedom. You built a career. You proved to yourself that you could stand on your own. You just helped us win a little bit more." He turned and walked toward the car, no longer the broken man from the park bench, but a king reclaiming his kingdom. He paused before getting in, looking back at me one last time. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice losing its edge of mockery, "your designs really are breathtaking." Then he got in the car, and it pulled away, disappearing down the street, leaving me alone on the sidewalk, holding a check for $10 million. I looked from the check in my hand to the gray facade of the St. Jude's Mission, then back to the empty park bench. The emptiness I had been feeling for the past year was finally gone. It was replaced by a strange, profound sense of clarity. My revenge hadn't been a failure. My plan hadn't been for nothing. I had been manipulated, yes. I had been a tool in a larger scheme. But it didn't matter. The cage was still open. I was still free. I had my firm, my reputation, my life, a life I had built myself, brick by brick. And Mark? He had his company, his money, and Eleanor. He was right back where he started, in a gilded cage with a new keeper. I started to laugh. It wasn't a sound of hysteria or despair. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. I had set out to dismantle his life, and I had. The fact that he'd managed to build a new one from the rubble didn't change what I had accomplished. I tore the $10 million check in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter into a nearby trash can. I didn't need their money. I had my own. I had earned it. I walked back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt completely and utterly mine. The story wasn't about his victory or my defeat. It was about the architecture of a new life, and I was the only architect I needed.